Welcome back to Hearts Wine from Heart's Distractions, where we dive deep into the messiness, the beauty, and the real, raw truth about relationships, from the excitement of new dating to the challenges of long term commitments and marriage. I'm your host, of course, Alicia Minor Gaines. And yes, I am your licensed marriage and family therapist, your relationship coach, relationship columnist, author, poet, mixologist, and so much more. And today's episode, y'all, I need y'all to follow me on this one, is about to stir up some conversations, y'all. I promise you, in households, group chats, and probably a few car rides home. The title of today's episode is 50-50 Relationships Sound Good Until They Don't. And baby, if you've ever felt like you were carrying more in your relationship while still trying to convince yourself things were equal, this episode is definitely for you. Because somewhere along the way, relationships started sounding more like business arrangements than partnerships. Split the bill, split the chores, split the parenting, split the emotional labor. And while equality sounds good in theory, real life has a way of exposing just how complicated balance actually is. Because what happens when one partner is emotionally exhausted? What happens when one person is carrying the mental load of the household? What happens when parenting responsibilities quietly fall onto one person while the other thinks taking the trash out deserves a standing ovation? Woo, y'all, we're going there today. In this episode, we're unpacking the truth behind the 50-50 relationship debate, from finances and emotional labor to household responsibilities, parenting, resentment, generational expectations, and the invisible workload that so many couples silently struggle with. We're talking about why relationships can start feeling transactional, why scorekeeping kills intimacy, and why fairness and love is deeper than simply splitting everything down the middle. Because the reality is, relationships are not math equations. They are living, breathing partnerships that require flexibility, communication, sacrifice, and grace. We're also diving into the pressure social media places on modern couples to perform independence while still somehow maintaining emotional closeness. And let's be honest, half the people online giving relationship advice can barely text their partner back without an attitude. So today, we're removing the filters and getting honest about what healthy partnership actually looks like behind closed doors. As always, this conversation is for all couples, dating, engaged, married, LGBTQ+, long distance, blended families, everybody. Because no matter what your relationship looks like, every, and I do mean every, eventually has to answer the same question. Are we building together or just splitting responsibilities? So go ahead and pour your wine, get comfortable, and maybe don't side-eye your partner too hard while listening to this one. Because tonight's conversation might just expose some truths sitting quietly inside your relationship. All right, now let's go ahead and get into the part that tends to start the most arguments. Y'all know what I'm about to say, or do y'all? Well, if you don't, it's money. Because if there's anything that will expose the real dynamics in a relationship, it's finances. And social media has made it very clear. People are passionate about the 50-50 conversation when it comes to bills. You've got one side saying everything should be split down the middle. You know, rent, utilities, dates, trips, everything. And then you got another side saying, no, relationships aren't roommates. Someone should take on more responsibility depending on the situation. And honestly, both sides think they're right. But here's where things get complicated, because 50-50 only works when both people are operating from equal capacity. I'm going to leave that one right there for y'all. And then in real life, that's rarely the case. One partner might make more money. One partner might have more financial obligations. One partner might be supporting family members, paying off debt, or navigating a completely different financial reality. So when you're trying to force everything into a 50-50 structure, what you're really doing is ignoring the differences that exist between you. And those differences, trust me, they matter. Research in marriage and family therapy consistently shows that financial stress is one of the leading causes of conflict in relationships. And it's not just about the money itself, it's about what money represents. It represents security, stability, power, and sometimes even worth. Yes, self-worth. So when one partner feels stretched too thin, trying to keep up with a 50-50 expectation, it doesn't just affect their bank account. It affects their emotional well-being, their confidence, how they see themselves, and how they show up in the relationship. Let me give you an example. Imagine a couple, we're going to call them Danielle and Marcus. So Danielle makes significantly more than Marcus. We already know that's a problem, right? Right, ladies? But they've agreed to split everything 50-50 because they believe that what makes things fair is splitting things down the middle. At first, it feels balanced, but over time, Marcus starts to feel the pressure. He's working harder just to keep up, sacrificing more, stressing more, and quietly feeling like he's falling behind. Meanwhile, Danielle feels like she's doing the right thing by keeping things equal, not realizing that what feels equal to her feels overwhelming to him. Now, I know some of y'all thinking, doesn't it usually go the other way? Isn't it usually the man feeling that way versus the woman and vice versa? Well, we're going to keep going on that one because here's where things got real. Because there was the disconnect, right? Because equality and equity are not the same thing in this relationship, if you're following the story, right? Equality says we split everything evenly. Equity says we adjust based on what each can realistically contribute. It don't say gender roles, right? All right, we're going to keep going. And if you're building a life with someone, not just splitting bills, you have to start thinking beyond numbers and start thinking about partnership. Because love isn't about who paid what. It's about whether both people feel supported in what they're carrying. Now, let's shift into something that doesn't show up on a bill, doesn't have a dollar amount attached to it, but will absolutely determine whether your relationship thrives or falls apart. And that is emotional labor. Because this is where the whole idea of 50-50 really starts to break down in ways people don't even realize at first. Emotional labor is all the invisible work that keeps a relationship functioning. It's remembering the important dates, checking in after a long day, initiating difficult conversations, planning quality time, managing conflict, being emotionally available, and creating a sense of connection and safety. And here's the truth. Emotional labor is rarely split 50-50. In many relationships, one naturally takes on more of that responsibility, whether it's due to personality, upbringing, gender roles, or simply being more emotionally aware. And over time, that imbalance can start to feel heavy because while one person is doing the internal work to maintain the relationship, the other person may not even realize how much effort is being put in behind the scenes. Think about a scenario where one partner is always the one saying, "Let's talk." Always the one checking in, always the one trying to fix things when there's tension, and the other partner, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong, but they're also not doing the same level of emotional work. So now you've got a situation where technically things might look balanced on the outside. Bills are paid, responsibilities are shared, but emotionally, one person is carrying the relationship. And this is where resentment starts to build. Not loudly at first, but quietly, subtly, because the person doing more emotional labor starts to feel unseen, unappreciated, and eventually exhausted. And the other person may feel confused, thinking everything is fine. We're doing things equally, not realizing that emotional effort isn't always visible, but it is always felt. There's a quote from relationship research that says, the quality of a relationship is directly tied to the emotional responsiveness between partners. And emotional responsiveness requires effort, people. It requires awareness. It requires intention. And if one person is constantly giving more of that than the other, 50-50 stops feeling fair real quick. So the question becomes, are you splitting responsibilities or are you sharing the weight of the relationship? Because those are two very different things. And if you're not paying attention to the emotional side of things, you might think you're in a balanced relationship when in reality, one person is doing most of the work to keep it together. Now listen, we cannot have a conversation about 50-50 relationships without talking about the household responsibilities and parenting side of things because, whew, I'll tell you, this right here is where a lot of relationships start quietly falling apart behind closed doors. And the reason this conversation matters so much is because household labor and parenting responsibilities are often some of the most overlooked forms of work in a relationship. People notice who pays the bills because money is visible. But folding laundry, packing lunches, scheduling doctor's appointments, waking up with the baby at 3 a.m., remembering Spirit Week at school, that labor is invisible until the person doing most of it gets tired. And what's interesting is that a lot of couples genuinely believe things are split evenly until they actually sit down and look at everything that's being done on a daily basis. Because one partner might say, well, I take the trash out and mow the lawn, while the other partner is mentally managing the entire household every single day. And listen, I'm not minimizing any role here, but let's be honest. Taking the trash out once a week is not the same mental load of being the default parent, the default planner, the default cleaner, and the default emotional support person in the home. I think I just got too real for some of y'all out there, but I'm going to keep going. Research published in family psychology studies consistently shows that even in modern dual income households, one partner, often women in heterosexual relationships, still carries a disproportionate amount of domestic and emotional labor. And this imbalance becomes even more noticeable after children enter the picture, because parenting doesn't just add responsibility, it magnifies whatever imbalance already existed in the relationship. If communication was weak before kids, it gets weaker. If one person was already carrying more mentally, emotionally, or physically, it becomes even heavier once parenting responsibilities enter the equation. Let me paint a picture for y'all. Imagine a couple. We're going to call them Taylor and Chris. So both of them work full-time jobs, and technically, they both contributed financially. So from the outside, things look balanced. But once they get home, Taylor immediately shifts into another full-time role, helping with homework, cooking dinner, packing lunches for everybody for the next day, making sure the kids bathe, scheduling dentist appointments, remembering birthdays, washing uniforms, and mentally preparing for tomorrow before today even ends. Meanwhile, Chris genuinely believes things are equal because he helps when asked. I know some of y'all just rolled your eyes, because I know I did. But that phrase right there, when asked, is where the problem lives. Because Constantly having to delegate, remind, and manage another adult is exhausting. That's not shared responsibility, that's supervision. And eventually, the partner carrying the majority of the mental load starts feeling less like a romantic partner and more like the household manager or a parent of an adult. And let's be honest, nothing kills intimacy faster than feeling like you're raising children and your partner at the same time. I tell you, somebody just paused this episode and stared out the window for a second because that was too real. I know. But here's another truth. People don't talk about enough. Sometimes couples focus so hard on splitting tasks evenly that they forget to ask whether the division actually makes sense for their lifestyle. Okay, I know some of y'all roll eyes at me at that one too. But follow me though. Because maybe one partner genuinely prefers cooking while the other handles finances and school responsibilities. Maybe one works longer hours while the other handles more household management. The issue is not whether every task is split exactly down the middle. The issue is whether both people feel respected, supported, and appreciated in what they're carrying. Parenting, especially, requires flexibility because children do not care about your relationship spreadsheet. I said it. Kids get sick unexpectedly. Babies cry all night. Teenagers have emotional meltdowns 5 minutes before you're supposed to leave the house. Life happens. And if both partners are too busy keeping score, resentment builds quickly. Suddenly, every diaper change becomes a debate. Every school pickup becomes ammunition during an argument. Every sacrifice becomes something to hold over each other's head instead of something done out of love and teamwork. There's a powerful quote from therapist and author Steve Rodsky that says, "The issue isn't who does more. The issue is the exhaustion of always being responsible." And that right there explains why so many couples feel disconnected. It's not always the tasks themselves. It's the mental burden of never being able to fully rest because the household and parenting responsibilities are always sitting on your mind. So what's the solution? Couples have to stop assuming and start communicating clearly. Instead of saying, "Help me," start creating ownership. Shared responsibility means both people noticing what needs to be done without always waiting for instructions. It means recognizing invisible labor. It means appreciating effort instead of only pointing out what's missing. And most importantly, it means understanding that parenting and maintaining a household are not side jobs in a relationship. They are part of the relationship itself. Because the strongest households are not built by couples who split every responsibility perfectly. They're built by couples who understand how to support each other through different seasons of life. Some seasons require one person to carry more. Some seasons require deeper grace. And some seasons simply require both people to stop competing and start acting like a team again. And baby, if your relationship starts feeling like a chore chart instead of a connection, it may be time to reevaluate what partnership actually means. Now, let's talk about what happens when the idea of 50-50 slowly starts feeling fair and starts feeling frustrating. Because this is where resentment quietly sneaks into relationships and makes itself comfortable. And the thing about resentment is that it rarely shows up loudly in the beginning. It builds slowly underneath the surface through repeated moments where one person feels like they're carrying more while the other person thinks everything is perfectly balanced. It starts with little thoughts like, "Why do I always have to remind you?" Or, "Why am I the one handling this again?" And eventually, those thoughts turn into emotional exhaustion. Because when relationships become too focused on splitting everything equally, couples can actually turn love into scorekeeping. I cooked dinner yesterday, so you should cook tonight, is what most people say, right? Or they'll say, I paid this bill, so you should pay the next one. Or maybe it even sounds like, I put the kids to bed all week, so now it's your turn. And while accountability and teamwork matter, there's a difference between healthy responsibility and transactional love. One creates partnership, the other creates pressure. And honestly, nowhere does resentment build faster than inside the home and within parenting responsibilities. Because let's be real, household responsibilities are not just about tasks, they're about mental energy. It's not just washing dishes, it's noticing they need to be washed. It's not just taking the child to practice, it's remembering the schedule, signing permission slips, buying snacks, scheduling appointments, and mentally managing the entire family calendar while still trying to function as a partner, parent, employee, and a human being. And this is where a lot of couples miss each other emotionally. One partner feels like they're drowning in invisible labor while the other partner genuinely believes they're helping equally because they complete assigned tasks. But there's a difference between shared responsibility and supervised responsibility. If one person has to constantly delegate, remind, organize, and carry the mental load, they're not sharing the burden, they're managing it. There's a reason so many parents, especially mothers in heterosexual relationships, report feeling emotionally burnt out in long-term partnerships. Okay, I'm going to take that back because it ain't just heterosexual women. It's also those in the LGBTQ plus community too. Hello. Now, yes, studies in family psychology consistently show that even in dual income households, one partner often carries a disproportionate amount of domestic and emotional labor. And over time, that imbalance creates quiet resentment that starts leaking into intimacy, communication, patience, and emotional connection. Now imagine this. One partner finally sits down after handling work, dinner, bath time, homework, bedtime routines, and preparing for tomorrow. Meanwhile, the other partner says, you should have just asked for help. Baby, by the time somebody has to ask for help every single time, they're already overwhelmed, and eventually resentment turns into emotional withdrawal. The affection changes, the patient changes, the relationship starts feeling less romantic and more operational. There's a quote from relationship expert John Gottman that says, resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I'm going to leave that right there because that just flew over some people's head. Because resentment doesn't just hurt the relationship, it slowly drains the emotional safety inside it. And if couples don't address those imbalances honestly, they can end up living like coworkers managing a household instead of partners building a life together. So the real question becomes this. Are you both contributing in ways that make each other feel supported, or are you both simply trying to avoid feeling taken advantage of? Because those are two very different relationship dynamics. All right, let's go ahead and call out some of the red flags that show up when a 50-50 relationship dynamic becomes unhealthy. Because sometimes couples think they're being fair when they're actually creating emotional distance without realizing it, right? The first red flag is when the relationship starts feeling transactional instead of loving. Every action becomes tied to repayment. Every responsibility becomes a negotiation. Every argument somehow circles back to who did more, paid more, sacrificed more, or handled more. And listen, if your relationship starts sounding like two coworkers debating job duties instead of two people emotionally connected to each other, something deeper is probably going on. Another major red flag is rigidity. When there's no flexibility for life, stress, parenting, emotional burnout, or unexpected changes, healthy relationships require adaptability because life does not operate on a perfect schedule. Somebody might lose a job. Somebody might experience depression, grief, burnout, pregnancy exhaustion, postpartum struggles, family stress, or emotional overwhelmness, if that's a word. And if the relationship can't bend during difficult seasons, one person usually breaks under the pressure. Now, let's talk about the household and parenting red flags specifically, because this is where imbalance often hides in plain sight. One huge warning sign is when one partner becomes the default adult in the home. They're the one automatically responsible for remembering everything, managing everything, planning everything, and solving problems before they even happen. Meanwhile, the other partner waits for instructions or only participates when directly asked. And let's be honest, having to constantly ask another grown adult to participate in maintaining the household or raising children can become emotionally exhausting. Because now, one partner isn't just parenting the children, they're also mentally managing the partnership itself. That imbalance creates frustration, emotional fatigue, and eventually, what? Resentment. Another red flag is when appreciation disappears. Household labor and parenting become expected, but never acknowledged. One person is constantly giving energy to the home, but nobody notices until they stop doing it. And that right there, that's how people begin feeling invisible inside their relationships. There's also emotional neglect hiding inside some 50-50 dynamics as well. Couples become so focused on dividing responsibilities evenly that they stop prioritizing emotional connection, affection, intimacy, laughter, and teamwork. Everything becomes about tasks instead of tenderness, survival instead of connection. And one of the biggest red flags of all, y'all, when exhaustion becomes somebody's personality. If one partner constantly looks emotionally drained, mentally overloaded, irritated, disconnected, or unsupported, don't ignore it. Burnout inside relationships is real. Burnout inside parenting is real. And many couples wait until resentment explodes before finally addressing the imbalance that's been building for years. There's a powerful quote from Eve Rodsky, yes, again, which says, "The issue is not who does more. The issue is who carries the responsibility of making sure everything gets done." Whew, that one hits differently when you really sit with it. And I'm going to leave that right there so y'all can. So, if you're listening today, I want you to ask yourself honestly, not are things equal, but do we both feel supported, valued, appreciated, and emotionally safe? Because relationships built only on equal division eventually feels cold. But relationships built on teamwork, grace, communication, and mutual care, as well as mutual understanding, those are the ones that survive real life. Now, can I get a little deeper for y'all? Because the way we approach relationships, especially this whole 50-50 idea, doesn't just come from social media. It's rooted in generational patterns, upbringings, and what we've been taught to believe about love, roles, and partnership. For some people, they grew up watching relationships where one person, often a man, was the provider, and the other handled the home, which was the woman, the emotions, and the caregiving. So now in modern relationships, there's this push to move away from that and create something more equal. And that's not a bad thing. Growth is necessary, of course. But sometimes in trying to avoid the imbalance of the past, we overcorrect into something that doesn't fully work either. Follow me. Because now, you've got people saying, I don't need anybody. Everything should be split evenly. I'm not depending on anyone for anything. And while independence is powerful, relationships still require interdependence. They require leaning on each other. They require moments where one person carries more so the other doesn't have to. And depending on your cultural background, your beliefs about roles and relationships might look completely different. Some cultures emphasize collective support and shared responsibility in ways that aren't always measured equally, but they still feel balanced. Other cultures prioritize independence and equality in a more structured way. So when two people come together, they're not just bringing themselves, they're bringing their history, their expectations, their learned behaviors. And if those things aren't talked about, you can end up in a relationship where both people think they're doing the right thing, but it still doesn't feel right. That's why awareness matters, people. Because once you understand where your beliefs about relationships come from, you can start deciding what actually works for your relationship, not just what looks good online or what you were taught growing up. All right. So now that we've unpacked the truth, let's talk about what actually works. Because the goal isn't to throw out the idea of balance altogether. The goal is to redefine it in a way that actually supports your relationship. First things first, communication has to be real, not surface level. Not just we split things evenly, but does this actually feel fair to both of us? Because fairness is a feeling, not just a formula. And if one person feels overwhelmed while the other feels comfortable, then something needs to be adjusted. Second, shift from a 50-50 mindset to a 100 mindset. Yep, I said it. Not in the sense that you're always giving everything at the same time, but in the sense that both people are committed to giving their best based on what they have in that moment. Sometimes it's about living in the moment, people. Some days that might look like 80-20. Y'all heard of the 80-20 rule. Some days it might look like 60-40. I know some of y'all rolled your eyes. It's okay. But the intention is always to support each other, not compete with each other. I'm going to leave that one right there. Third, learn your partner's capacity, not just what they should be able to do, but what they can realistically handle without burning out. Because love should feel supportive, not exhausting. And finally, build a partnership mindset. That means asking, what do we need? Instead of what's mine versus yours. Because at the end of the day, you're not splitting a life, you're building one together. All right, y'all. At the end of the day, here's the truth. Love was never meant to feel like a constant calculation. Relationships are not spreadsheets, chore charts, custody schedules, emotional invoices, or scoreboards where everybody's tracking who did what last. Real partnership goes deeper than splitting bills and dividing responsibilities down the middle. It's about learning how to carry each other through different seasons of life without making love feel transactional. Because sometimes your partner is going to need more from you emotionally. Sometimes one person is going to carry more financially. And sometimes parenting responsibilities are going to feel uneven. And you know what? Sometimes life is going to overwhelm one person more than the other. And healthy relationships are not built by couples who demand perfect equality every single day. They're built by couples who understand flexibility, passion, communication, and teamwork. And let's be real even more. Some of the strongest relationships are not 50-50 all the time. Sometimes, yes, they are 80-20. Sometimes they are 60-40. Sometimes it shows up as, I know you're exhausted, so I got this today. That's partnership. That's love. That's emotional safety. Because when two people stop competing against each other and start supporting each other, the relationship stops feeling heavy and starts feeling like home again. If today's episode made you reflect on your own relationship dynamics, I want you to remember this. Fairness is not about everything being equal. It's about both people feeling valued, supported, respected, and seen. And that requires ongoing conversations, self-awareness, accountability, and grace for each other as you grow together. So whether you're dating, engaged, married, rebuilding, or simply trying to figure love out one day at a time, I hope this episode reminds you that healthy love isn't about keeping score. It's about staying connected even when life gets unbalanced. So what I want y'all to do, if you like this episode, keep it for yourself or share it with someone. But I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel at Hearts One from Hearts Distractions. And I want you to go to my website, check it out, www.aliciasdistractions.com. Some stuff is coming, y'all. Go check out my poetry book, Distractions of the Heart, on Amazon. And of course, follow me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And until next time, protect your peace, communicate with intention, love with maturity, and don't let social media teach you how to treat your partner better than real connection does. Now raise your glasses with me one last time and say what? Cheers.